In this lesson, we'll take a look at how we can start to work with objects in Cinema 4D. So now that we know our way around the interface a little bit, we've taken a look at the 3D view, let's take a look at adding objects to our scenes. And so we'll come up here and there's going to be a command group up here. You can see the grouping of icons right here starting with the blue cube. This is going to be the objects that we're able to go ahead and create. You can also go under the objects menu and you can see under primitives we have a number of these objects. It's going to be the same list that we have if we open up these primitives here. Okay, splines, same thing. Okay, we also have generators to create NURBS surfaces as well as our subdivision solution here in Cinema 4D, the HyperNURBS. And then we also have arrays, booleans, things like that for generators, and then deformer objects along with lights and cameras and then particle emitters and things like that. So we'll start by looking at the primitives that we've got. So we'll just click on this and let's just create a cylinder. You can see it pops into the 3D view. You can see there's also now an entry in our objects manager for cylinder with a little cylinder icon next to it. Now the attributes for the cylinder, for instance the height and the radius, can be found in the attributes manager. So looking down here we have a number of tabs. Some of these are common to all objects, and then we have the object caps and slice that we can really use to modify this specific cylinder. The other ones, we've got the coordinates, we've got basic things like visibility for that, and we can modify those here, but we'll take a look at the object attributes here. And so we've got radius, height segments, rotation segments, and orientation. We also have a couple of handles here in the 3D view that we can use to manipulate these attributes manually. If I click and drag this, you can see I'm changing the height, and then this outer ring I'm changing the radius. We can also modify those in here in our attributes manager as well. Okay, we can change the height segments, change the rotation segments. We can also change the orientation if we want to and move that around so it's oriented in different directions. Okay, under caps, we have the ability to cap this cylinder or not. We can change the number of segments. We can also add fillet to add some softness around the edges if we want to do that. If we'd like to slice this, we can go ahead and choose slice and then choose an angle and create just a section of that particular cylinder. Okay, so there are a number of attributes that we're able to change for each of these primitives. Those are going to be found in your attributes manager. Of course, you need to have that object selected. Okay, so if we bring in, let's say, another object, we'll bring in our oil tank. You can see that we now have a new icon here for our oil tank primitive, and we've got a number of different attributes that we're able to modify here. And so we can change the radius, we can change the height segments. And so as long as this stays a primitive, we haven't converted it into a polygon object, we will have these attributes to be able to modify and change. Okay, so now let's say that we want to change the visibility or maybe start to move these objects around within our scene. So if we go to our basic tab here, you'll see that we have an option for visible in editor and visible in renderer. These two are going to correspond to these two dots up here, right to the right side of our objects. And so the editor is going to be the top dot and the renderer is going to be the bottom dot. So in this case, visible in editor is set to default. If we set that to on, you can see that the oil tank has a green button now where it did have just kind of a gray button. Okay, if we turn it off, it's going to be red. So we can modify that value here, or we can come in and just click and cycle through this. So red's going to be off, green's going to be on. So in this case, it would be invisible in the editor in here, but visible in the renderer. So we wouldn't be able to see it in here, but we would be able to render it. And so just think of those as kind of your stoplights as far as changing the visibility of your objects, and you can just cycle through those. Having it gray just means it will be the default. Okay, and same thing here on the cylinder. Now if you have a generator in here, and we'll look at this a little bit later, you can actually turn off the effect of the generator. In this case, we'll turn off our primitive. You can see the little X here. But for instance, if you have something smooth using a HyperNURBS, you can actually turn off the effect of that with a little check mark. And then this large dot enables you to add your objects to a layer. Okay, so now we've got our objects in here. Let's say we want to start to move these around a little bit. So we can come up here and choose the Move tool. And then we can grab any of these axes and move it around in a particular direction. You can see how our coordinates change. Oops. And just move those around. Okay, if we go under coordinates here, you can see how those coordinates change as well. And you can modify those coordinates manually if you want to, right in here. Okay, we can also scale. So selecting this right in the middle will enable us to scale this. Now, because this is a primitive, we're not scaling this in particular, we're not using a non-uniform scale basically. Okay, and go into coordinate, you can see that scale here. If we change this manually, we can go ahead and scale that non-uniformly in the X, Y, or Z. We can also rotate our objects, so go to rotate, and we can rotate these on a particular axis. Keep in mind that the axes are named a little bit differently in Cinema 4D. We are using H, P, and B, which is basically heading, pitch, and bank. Okay, but they correspond. You can see the bank corresponds in this case to the Z, and then X is pitch, and then the Y is going to be the heading. You can see that under Tools, Heading, Pitch, and Bank right down here. Okay, now hotkeys for these: E is going to be move, R is going to be rotate, and T is going to be scale. So you can use the hotkeys to enable that, and then go in and move your objects around into their desired locations. Okay, now as we go through and select these objects, I'm actually using the live selection here. You can also go in and use, if you want to use a rectangular marquee to drag around, you can change your selection tool here. If you want to use a lasso selection, you can do that. Keep in mind there are also some settings for using the selection. So for instance, if we come down here and use live selection, if we're working with, we don't really have that option here, but if we're working with different parts of the model, we can actually only select visible elements, and we use tolerant selection, which will enable us to only select portions, for instance, of a polygon to select the entire polygon. And we'll take a look at that in greater depth in the next lesson as we continue looking at some of the objects that we're able to create, and also look at how we can turn these primitives into polygon objects that we can then manipulate. So we'll go ahead and continue our look at objects here in Cinema 4D in the next lesson.